which is that I absolutely hate panels. I hate panels. I really hate panels. I hate them as an audience member. I hate them as a person who's been on a panel, because they always feel to me like they're very short talks, and they can be really disjointed. And you know, when I think there's also something super awkward about the kind of physical presentation of a panel, because we don't get a chance to look at each other, and it's really hard. You have to sort of crane your neck to look at everybody's slides. But what I tried to do, and I asked the members of this panel, I tried to imagine that we were just sitting at a table, like at a coffee shop, and we're looking at each other. And you know, I like conversation, and for me it just feels so awkward when you get questions coming in, each member of the panel just goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, and actually just talking is really nice, So, so as much as possible, hopefully I didn't start this off in a bad note with dissing panels. As much as possible, I'd like to really, and I've never moderated a panel, so we'll see what it's like to moderate. So, okay. So I'm going to start with just one image, and I'm going to use this image to kind of frame this conversation of open source art. And this is an aerial view of some farmland in the Midwest. And I love this image. I shot this image. I was on an airplane. I sort of looked out the window. And the thing that's really beautiful is it looks like you're flying over pie charts. Something kind of amazing. And it's really like, this is modern farming, right? This is what modern farming is about, because it makes sense because of how they water the crops and work with the crops. It makes sense to sort of plant things circularly. But it just looks so beautiful to me. But I also really like this idea, or this notion of farming as a metaphor to describe open source. And I think we have, how many of you have really been to a farm, like worked on a farm? Right, so some of you in the audience have. So we have a very idyllic view of what it's like to be on a farm, right? And you're sort of like, oh, the cows, the pasture, so pretty. But actually farming is work. And farming involves cow manure and flies and dirt and mud, right? It's actual work. And there's something, I think, about the metaphor of farming as a way of describing open source, where it sounds very ideal, but it's actually real work. You're putting things out there. You're it's not just sharing, but you're actually kind of working. And things happen in farming that happen at timescales that you can't imagine, right? You have the timescale of the seasons, but there's also the timescale of the soil, and there's all kinds of things that are happening. There are things that happen that you can control, like when you plant the crops and how much fertilizer you use, and there are things that happen that you can't control, like the weather and so on. And I think there's something that's very I don't know, for me, there's something kind of beautiful about this idea of farming as a way to describe what we do. In my own life, I've been a farmer in projects like Open Frameworks, which is an open source tool that really kind of originated here at Parsons. As a, and something that I've noticed working on this thing is that over this really long time frame, you start to see patterns that emerge that are sort of hard to see on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis. Also, I've been involved in starting a school this year, so I left Parsons, starting a school called the School for Poetic Computation, and this is really like the kind of first moment of planting the seeds and seeing what happens, and something like that. And I was thinking about farming, in farming, you look at something like this, it looks really complex, but it's based on something really simple. And the same thing's true, like if you're working with electronics, right? When you start doing electronics, you work on a breadboard, and then you might solder things together, and then you start doing surface mount, and you start producing, and it gets to be really complex. But at the heart, it's something really basic. And at the heart of farming is something really basic, which is like putting a seed in the ground and seeing something emerge. And hopefully, what I want this panel is to, we'll talk about our work. I want to invite the panelists to also talk a little bit about the cow manure, but then also about this kind of magic, which is like putting a seed and seeing what grows. So the other thing that I hate about panels not to rag on panels too much, is that people that moderate panels always just come up and they read people's bios, and I hate it. It's like, if you want to read somebody's bio, you can go on the internet, right? It's like, this person studied here and works here and did this and exhibited here, and it's like kind of a vomit of qualifications. But all these people are awesomely qualified to talk to you about their work and open source art. And so we're going to start with Scott Draves, and what I like, and what I tried to do is just find quotes or words that these people used. Scott talks about this idea of the internet distributed cyborg mind. And he has this idea, the reason that they're called electric sheep is because it's the computer's dream, just not your computer, but the computer. I was researching him, and he said, he went to CMU and he studied computer programming. He said, I didn't create language, I created language for creating languages, because I wanted to make it easier for everybody to create their own language. And so you'll get these towers of languages, and it's almost like being like virtual reality, where you have your realities and realities, where you can have languages within languages. Scott.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Zach. And I apologize for having a cold. I had to come. Zach asked for farm animals. This is actually a GNU. And GNU stands for GNU is not Unix. And that's really where open source started, from a guy named Richard Stallman. And I was first exposed to his work in the 80s through a program. He wrote an amazing amount of software, and he wrote the GPL, the first open source license, really, and founded the Free Software Foundation. And he wrote the Emacs editor, which I became intimately involved with using. And I saw how well this worked. And then, so naturally, when I started writing my own sort of code art, I released it under the GPL. The first algorithm was called the Flame algorithm, and it was really something that creates abstract imagery, but it doesn't use the normal techniques or the normal paradigm of computer graphics, which is the drawing lines and shapes, kind of an architectural or the CAD/CAM model. Instead, this was really a way of creating images by solving sort of equations using supercomputer power. And it's interesting because you don't know what you're going to get before you start. And so it wasn't a way of sort of realizing a vision, but a way for the computer to sort of come up with its own vision. And this was in the early 90s, so I think I worked on for this program for a couple of years, and when the web first came out, I made a gallery of these, about 100 images, and the software that created them. And then I submitted them to the Pars Electronica, and this particular image won a prize back then. And it's interesting, about 2 years ago, this source code and this gallery of images was actually finally acquired by a museum, MIAC, in Spain. So that's an interval of about 20 years between the work and the being preserved. And so I think that's better than, or an improvement over Lynn's 30 or 40 years. So we are making progress, and maybe we can expect our children to actually sort of make it as they do it. So the next algorithm I did was called Fuse, and it works by, this was inspired by William S. Burroughs' cut-up technique, but applied, which is a way of writing poetry, but applied to the visual domain. So this takes input image and then cuts it up into little pieces and then reassembles it in a way that kind of makes sense, but scrambled. And this is actually a combination. You can give it more than one input image. So this is me and a friend of mine, who I was living in Tokyo at the time, sort of combined into one thing. And here's an image of my face made out of just my eyes. So if you look, it's all eyes. Now, and then the next algorithm I released, and is called BOM, and that was when I started to get into sort of live video performance. So BOM is supposed to be like a musical instrument, but instead of making sound, it makes video. So you can play it live, and it produces this animated abstraction. And that was really when I first started to get into the sort of the theory of open source as an artistic practice and what that means and why I do it. And so I wrote some manifestos about that. And then the next thing was called the Electric Sheep, which was by far the most successful of these open source projects. And the Electric Sheep is based on that flame algorithm, but instead of producing static images, it produces animations using this sort of distributed computer, this cyborg mind, where there's input from the audience. So, and it works via Darwinian evolution. So here's a family tree, so you can see how the images evolve. And I'll show you here, this is what it looks like these days. I can only play it for a couple of seconds here, but it pretty much just keeps doing this stuff indefinitely. And the interesting thing about the Electric Sheep, well, besides the source code being open and sort of allowing other artists to participate in it, the images themselves, the genetic codes of the sheep, are also Creative Commons licensed, and then the sheep images, the JPEGs and MPEGs, are Creative Commons licensed, so that anybody can remix the sheep videos, use them for performances, and if you go on YouTube, you'll find like hundreds of sort of artworks of various kinds. And it's one thing that's notable is that the genetic algorithm actually sort of encodes the idea of Creative Commons, because in order to get permission to mutate or to sort of do the crossover, in order to mate two images, I need that's creating a derivative work. And then this was in the late 90s, and there was a company named Red Hat, which was sort of the Linux company at that time, went public, and because of my open source contributions up to that point, both in these sort of graphics programs, but also just other sort of more utilitarian things, they actually granted a lot of the open source contributors stock. So this was the first time I actually sort of made money because of having written open source code, and that really made me think like maybe this could be turned into a sustainable practice, because I was already, I was working as a grad student, I was working in Silicon Valley as an engineer, and sort of this artistic stuff was really it was a lifelong pursuit and very consuming, but it wasn't, the way I supported myself. It wasn't how I paid my rent. And so the success of Red Hat made me think like, oh, well, maybe open source can pay the rent, and if you can do that, then it could actually become much bigger. So it's very easy just to sort of give everything away, or to but you end up a charity case. But if you can sort of just turn it from a parasitic process into a self-sustaining one, then it can grow much larger. So my first attempt to sort of to turn open source into a business model was being a VJ through a thing, and so I released a DVD of this sort of visual music, which anybody could VJ with, and so it was the first Creative Commons licensed DVD. And my idea was, my programs would be free, but you could, if you wanted a live show, you would hire me to be the VJ, and I would come to your event. And so this turned out, so I did a lot of sort of party VJ, working with DJs kind of stuff. This turns out to be a great way to make friends and be invited to parties, but not a great way to make money, because you as the VJ, you have to buy your own projectors, you have to buy your own computers, and ultimately, the party business is, it's about the music and about selling alcohol. So I didn't feel like it was there was a long career path ahead of me, even though I did manage to have a good time. This is a corporate event, so there was money to be made, and I think these days it's a much larger field, And I think, and there are people who support themselves. It's a tough business. And so I sort of thought to myself, where, oh, geez, I'm out of time. So I'm going to skip through. This is Burning. This is the Burning Man, where I first got into the immersive projection stuff, and then the great thing about open source is not only can you get people to contribute to your code and to help you fix bugs, and you can see them enable their vision. They can actually do things which you didn't expect. So, like making book covers and album covers with the Flame algorithm, and then ultimately selling it into corporate environments and museums. So, and then apps. So, which is like the current sort of marketplace for code. So, thank you very much, and I will hand the mic to the next presenter.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. The next presenter is Stefanie. You're gonna have to help me with Wuschitz. Am I saying that right? Wuschitz, who is coming to us by way of Austria, and actually just outside we were talking, and we were like, oh, you teach at this university. She said, I quit my job 2 days ago. So we either have to I think we should applaud her for quitting her job, and we'll either hear about it or it's so recent that it's not in the slides, but we can ask her about it after, at the after party. And I was looking at her work, which is really beautiful and very varied. And one of the projects that I really, caught my eye is this laboratory which she helped initiate in Austria. And so I'm going to read you the description of this laboratory because I thought it was very beautiful. Miss Balthazar's Laboratory is a weekly event taking place in Vienna, Austria, specifically for persons who call themselves women or trans. If you love making things rather than consuming them, meet up at Miss Balthazar's to share your skills. Miss Balthazar's participants come from different backgrounds, ages, and mindsets to exchange equipment, build circuits, play with DIY electronics and interactive art. We encourage each other to learn new tools and to collaborate. All workshops are free in order to offer a fearless, accessible platform to tinker with male-connoted toys. The artwork created at Miss Balthazar's Laboratory is generated with open source, soft and hardware. We see the process of demystifying technology as a fun way to articulate ourselves and become creative. So.
Thanks so much, Beck. Hello, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Zach, for the invitation. Yes, please, just press. Yeah, I work as a visual artist, and I work with open source hardware and software. But I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about feminist hackerspaces. The traditional concept of hackerspaces is that people come together to share their skills and share knowledge about tools, and things that might be too expensive for them to learn by themselves or buy by themselves. They come together and teach each other, for example, laser cutting or 3D printing, and they use these tools to do what they really care about and what's really important to themselves. So it's a very creative place, and a lot of ideas grow, but it's mainly men. It's mainly male members in workshops at hackerspaces. So I would like to make it more inclusive. So I started this Miss Balthazar's Laboratory, which is consisting of 3 rules, basically. It's women and trans only, and it's only open source hardware and software that we're teaching in these workshops. And we're about slowly building networks between participants so they can encourage each other. And yeah, the workshop usually is in different places in the world. We teach like for example, processing or Arduino, and then people play with it and create artwork in a week collaboratively and show it. So for me, it's a perfect environment to develop my work, and I think also for other female artists. So since 2 years, we have our own space in Vienna, in Austria, that's kind of trying to make the room feel safe. Like from outside pressure, from having to have profit from your work, and from restrictions, and mainly from stereotypes, like gender stereotypes. So we do festivals and exhibitions and reading groups and all kinds of fun events. And yeah, it's about 80 to 90 workshops that we did until now, and it's always like a group of 10 to 15 people. So when we do it in other countries, sometimes it's developing regions like in Syria or Indonesia, but also in other countries like Denmark or whatever. It's been many. And it's about collaborating in different places and combine open source with the idea of commoning and commons. And I hope that, yeah, this is part of my own projects. I hope that collaborating kind of makes a different visual culture for technology, so more women feel interested and attracted to work with open source technology. Yeah. Thanks so much for your attention.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Stefanie. So next up, we're going to have a kind of dual presentation with Lauren McCarthy and Evelyn Eastmond. And I'll read you some quotes from both of them. I have these, all these people on stage have these really long bios. So I thought if I read you their bios, it's going to take forever, because they're all awesome, and they've all exhibited work and taught and been involved in so many great projects. Evelyn is a computer programmer and artist, and she says she's a firm believer in the democratizing power that universal access to tools bring. And she's investigating the generosity of frameworks and abstraction, fields that enable participants to encounter me as well as each other on their own terms. And as far as Lauren, she says, I'm a designer, programmer, artist person. I really want to know you, but sometimes it's difficult. So I'm doing what I can to hack my way in. Will you join me in an uneasy moment that might let us be easier?
Thank you, Zach. We're honored to be here too. So excited. So we want to use these 5 minutes to quickly talk about a new open source creative coding library for the web that Lauren and I are building, and we're tentatively calling it P5JS. It's based on the popular processing platform and meant to bring the ideas and mission of that project to the JavaScript language HTML5. It was mentioned earlier today about that necessity. I'm Evelyn, and I'm an open web engineer at a consultancy called Boku. I'm also adjunct faculty at RISD, where I got my MFA. And I'm also an artist working on these things I call computational still lives, where I write like really mundane and deterministic algorithms, but then I respond to them and I humanize them through materials and my own experience.
I'm Lauren McCarthy, and I teach with Evelyn at RISD and also at NYU ITP, and I think Zach already gave a proper intro, so.
What brings us here is our connection to open source software and ideologies. As coders, as educators, and as artists, we don't only use open source tools, we also help design them, create them, and teach with them.
So with this library, we started with the original goals of processing, to make coding accessible for designers, artists, educators, and beginners, and to serve as a software sketchbook and teach programming fundamentals in a way that's intuitive and accessible. And we wanted to reinterpret this for today, for the web. So this P5 library is intended to introduce creative coding, introduce web development, and then create a bridge between the two. It was important that while this is accessible to beginners, it's not a sandbox app or environment, and that people develop a real web literacy. So they have the ability to extend and to begin to learn new things beyond the library on their own.
So what does it let you do that processing might not? Well, because it's written in JavaScript and you code in JavaScript, your environment is actually just Chrome, your web browser. That's where you make your projects. You work with something like Sublime, something that's familiar to you. No new operating IDE to work with. Because it works right out of the box in a browser, it's going to work on a bunch of your devices. You don't have to worry about exporting or anything, installing, also deal with interactions. And then inherently, with JavaScript, it's just shareable on the web right away.
So the web space is inundated with a lot of libraries, but a lot of them are very powerful and specific, more like a Swiss Army knife than a platform. In contrast, P5, we aim to make it accessible and broad. So it allows beginners to get started quickly by providing scaffolding for people to start creating visual or interactive experiences using JavaScript immediately. And then it also provides hooks to extend into areas that interest them, interfacing with existing libraries and tools. It's not domain specific, it's useful for all types of creative coding, from working with graphics, text, images, the DOM, and beyond. But most importantly, this P5 is about bringing processing ideas and community to the web. We wanted to build a strong support community of users for constructive help. So P5 is really focused on teaching and learning.
Even though it's so new, we've actually been using it at RISD to teach this semester. We have a couple students in the audience here, actually. Just to show some work, within the first couple of weeks, this is a work by Yi Wang. This is by Vivian Charlesworth. We were so excited to see just how quickly they could be making these things, also sharing them, having them on the web. This is Alex Stewart, interactive portrait. A lot of these deal with interaction and movement. Alison Ogazian. Celine Chappert. Remixing images. Dahi Park, kind of an interactive visualization tool. And a lot of these people had never programmed before. And this is an interactive landscape by Rami Hamour, interested in architecture. And so as we mentioned, the library is going to be open sourced. It's still in the very early stages of development by a small group of contributors, including us and also including the original processing team. The source code is already on GitHub, you can find it, and slowly growing to the point where we'll be ready for more community contributions soon, which we're really excited about. Not quite ready, but almost. I'm really grateful to be on this panel because we're constantly thinking about open source as it applies not only to art making, but also to education and tools, tool making and using tools. So thank you.
So thanks, Lauren and Evelyn. So our last presenter is Anton, or as I know him, Vade. And he says he makes pretty things with pixels for work and play. And he's really a staple of the VJ scene. Kyle McDonald, who's our friend in common, noticed this really great comment on one of like a video that Vade posted, which says, Vade, you solve all the right problems. So let's hear about the problems that you're solving.
Thank you very much. So this is sort of one of the first times I'm on a panel, and I'm realizing notes are a really smart thing to do, and I don't have any notes, so I'm sort of just going to wing it. So I wanted to talk a little bit how I personally got involved in the open source idea in the community. So my background originally was in video post-production. And I read on a website about this event that happened in New York City called Share, where people perform with video live. And this was many years ago, where the idea of working with video live was sort of a revelation to me. And so I curiously went to the event and met a lot of wonderful people, and one of them being Josh Goldberg. And he had written a performance environment using some software that he wrote. And I watched him use it, and I learned a lot from him. And sort of unbelievably, he gave me all of the source code to his environment. And so all of the amazing things that Josh was able to do on the screen that I thought was just really mind-blowing, and all of the encoding of his aesthetics and the tools and the way that he worked, he made and he baked into this environment. And then he just, without a thought, gave it to me for me to learn and to play with. And that was sort of mind-blowing, and still today that really is huge. So that is the first sort of introduction to the idea of open source and how it relates to art and performance for me. And so I wanted to really call that out, because a lot of times these tools are nameless and faceless, and there are people behind them, and it's a huge thing to do to put that out. So I really wanted to call out to that first. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that I make that are open source, and a lot of them have to do with performing and live video performance, and have built on a lot of the things that I've learned from Josh Goldberg's Draves, which is the name of the software. So the first thing that I wrote is a set of open source libraries for Max MSP and Jitter, everything from video effects to user interface elements and things like this. And I sort of put them out there, did a really poor job of marketing them or sort of getting the word out. And I've seen some really amazing work that people have done still today using them. And one of the nicest things about releasing work like that is I had a wonderful experience where I went to a show and I watched somebody perform, and I had a conversation with the artist afterwards. And I said, "How did you do that? That was so beautiful." He said, "Oh, I'm using your software. I'm using your tools." I was like, "What? How? Explain this to me." So that was again, it's a reinforcement of that process. So this is sort of the first large set of open source tools that I've put out. I have really creative names. So VO02, again, is just another set of similar libraries for doing image processing and effects. And putting these things out, you begin to have a network of people who come to you and ask questions. Or in this case, I got a random email from Tom Butterworth, who's a programmer far more skilled than I, who generously pointed out all the things I was doing wrong, which was really nice. And so I've learned a lot through collaborating with Tom, and I invited him to work on the software with me. And so something that was originally sort of my baby became our baby, if that makes any sense, which is quite nice. So that's sort of this project 02. And then one of the things that I was working on in this environment was a particular sort of effect that harkens back to some video processing done in the 70s on hardware called the Rhodetra synthesizer. And little did I know, Bill Etra was actually in New York, and friends of mine kindly introduced me to him, and we actually began collaborating on building a software version of the Rhodetra. And that's really an amazing journey to be able to work with somebody who's built these things and recreate them in software. And probably the reason that I'm here today is a project, by far the most successful project that's open source, called Siphon. And Siphon is a tool born out of necessity. I wanted to be able to do something that I couldn't do, which was be able to share between different applications. So my girlfriend, who is also a video performer, she works in processing, and I work in a different environment. And we weren't able to talk to one another in an easy way, to get our images and to play live. And so we had to figure out how could we do that. And so Tom and myself worked on this library called Siphon, and we gave it out for free to the world in hopes that we would have a huge environment or ecosystem of applications that could talk to one another for mixing live video. And we knew from the get-go the only way to do that would be to make it open source, because otherwise you're not going to convince anybody else to take it, to build the ecosystem, and to get people to adopt it easily. And fortunately, there's quite a few applications and environments that use it now. So any of these applications and any work that you can do in one environment, you can send it to another environment, you can work in pure data, send it to Unity, finish it off in processing, and then map it with MadMapper. It'll all just work. And so, yeah, that was really exciting to get that out. So, thank you very much.
Awesome. So now is the moment of the panel that I've been dreading, which is, what I started this panel, talked about how much I disliked panels. But really one of the things that I find really kind of awkward about panels is that somebody will ask a question and then we'll just answer one by one by one. And it's like we actually physically can't have a conversation. Like, it's really hard. We're not, it's like we're sort of oriented at this. It's like what's that famous painting? It's like a Last Supper orientation, right? It's really hard. It's hard for us to have a conversation. So what I want to encourage everybody that's standing up here to do is really like, let's just talk. Like, let's talk, and let's not we don't have to answer the question. We can ask each other questions, and if it was me, we'd have a round table. We'd have some cups of coffee or beer.
All right, Oprah.
Yeah. And then also, I should note that there are these microphones here, and I'm going to start. I'll kick it off, and I'll ask a question or two. But there's an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. And this should feel like a conversation. And the last thing that I'm going to do, and I told them all about this in a kind of frantic email last night, is that I'm going to ask them to endorse. So the way this panel is going to end is I'm going to ask them just to mention one project or person or book or thing that they think is interesting as a way of oftentimes I find with panels it's really hard to walk away with something to look at. So I asked them actually to kind of give you homework. So I'm mentioning this so they can think about what your homework is. And then that's how we'll wrap up. So it occurs to me that one of the things that's interesting is you're all invested in open source to solve problems, right? That was one of the themes that I was hearing. And also the theme of kind of the act of giving something away being important to the work that you make or creating tools. I wonder if you could just talk about, maybe what was a moment or a kind of thing that inspired you to give something away? What are your feelings when you create open source? Either whether it's you create an environment around open source or you're creating a tool. What were you feeling, and what are your biggest fears about open source?
Well, that's actually pretty interesting. Oh, I guess I'll use this one. That's an interesting question because I've totally have a policy that I figured out works for me in terms of what I release. And a lot of the tools and a lot of the software that I release has very specific aesthetic results. So an image processing effect that creates a certain look or that's able to create a certain look. And I, working in the VJ scene, I'll go around to clubs and I'll see, and I'll go, oh, I know you're using that thing that I put out there, but a lot of times it's, there's not space to go to make it your own. And so the policy that I've sort of come up with is I try to build tools that don't have too much aesthetics hard-coded. And the thing, in the sense of meaning you yourself on your own can explore the thing that I've put out and can make it your own by way of playing with it. And so there are actually things that I specifically don't release because they're sort of too close to home. They don't have enough dynamics. They're sort of unfinished. And also, I might find them a little too personal to actually put out there. And so there's things that I don't put out, and there's things that I do put out. And the metric for that is whether or not you can do something with it, and I can go, oh, I had no idea you're using that. That's really cool, because you made it your own.
Oh, can I ask?
Yeah.
What if someone just wants to learn from your personal one, but not use it?
Sure. I mean, I think they can learn just as well from the stuff that I put out. I mean, honestly, and I'm saying that really, I'm actually thinking about the code, and it is totally the same thing. It's just a few different things. But no, that's a valid question. That's just the approach that I've found within myself that personally feels I'm okay with that. But yeah, that's a very valid thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the only approach. And for example, I sort of have the opposite approach actually. In the stuff that I open source, it has its own aesthetic built in. And when I see stuff that was made with it, I know where it came from. And so it's both a tool that artists do use it, but there's a sort of an imprint that's left in it. So, but to go back to your question. I think it was in the early 90s. I was an academic, and I wanted to share. I wanted to teach and sort of spread the word. And it was, for me, it wasn't really about the particular images, but the space of possibility and enabling others to make their own. So then for me, that was sort of like the ultimate interaction is not between me and my computer, but among people through the code.
Okay, I'm gonna ask more questions, but I still feel like we need to break out of this. We need more conversation. So
we can move the tables.
we can, we can totally move it. I don't know
Get
if
my
that will
converser
mess up the
cue.
live stream. Okay, I really am interested in cow manure. So what's like, I talked about farming, I talked about cow manure. Like, what is the cow manure? I think one of the problems with this kind of conferences like this, like you see a lot of home runs. Like you see people coming up here and just showing you like home run after home run. And, it's like that if you just watch a baseball game and you see like, just all the home runs condensed in one clip, it just looks like the most amazing game, but there's a lot of strikeouts and foul balls and stuff. So I'm curious, like, what's the cow manure with what you're doing?
I would answer your last question and this question maybe with one example, because 2010 I gave a workshop for artists and informatic people in Syria, and in Syria there was okay, it's a horrible situation now there, but back then people just really embraced this open source technology and they made amazing spatial projects, and I was really very happy watching them being very immersed in creating this artwork and just making it for themselves. That was the good part about sharing this concept of feminist hackerspace with other people. But the drawback was that what is open source here is not open source everywhere. Like Arduino is unaffordable in many countries, and also Raspberry Pi. And we tried to download processing, but we had troubles because Sun was kind of blocking the internet. Like we couldn't download Java packages, and we needed 3 days to just install Arduino and processing, because also the censorship of the internet was, of course, from both sides. So now I'm really trying to work with garbage and make sensors from resistive materials and just use stuff that's already in every country, like garbage, hardware garbage, and not be reliant on too many outside sources.
More cow manure.
More cow manure?
Yeah, or like what's the work involved? Like if you were creating like open source tools, not just putting the tool out, but also cultivating a community, and there's conversations that happen. Like what is like the daily, what is work like?
Well, I think the reality of it, especially when you're building tools, is the expectation of immediate and thankless support for the tools you put out. And so it's depending on the day and the mood, the support that you will get for open source, or that I will provide for open source, is very different, because I don't make a living doing it, and so I have other things I have to do. So I think just conceptually putting it out there is 5%. The rest of it is, are people using it? What's wrong? What doesn't work? Explaining it. I mean, documentation is huge. It's just like a lot of project things that you don't necessarily think about. But I say like the cow manure is that, and if you expect donations, you're not going to get them, really. Not to make it about money, but if like we have a donation thing on the Siphon page, and we've gotten a few very nice donations from commercial companies that happen to be using the technology, but I think the last donation we got was for a penny. So.
Yeah, I would expand on that. Beyond just, donations are hard, but yeah, people, you put something out for free and then people expect you to do even more work for them. And if you try to make a living doing it by, say, charging for some kind of add-on, doing some kind of freemium thing, then people attack you as being some kind of traitor. Like why are you you gave that away for free? Why are you charging from this? So there's something wrong with you. So there's actually a lot of you can receive a lot of negativity that's pretty bizarre.
You can go ahead. No, you can go ahead. I think one thing I see is that a lot of these tools or open source projects or communities are built on really idealistic principles, which is like a large inspiration in building them, but it also sometimes sets you up for feeling like you don't, and because they're kind of developed ad hoc a lot of the times, you don't want to point out the problems or acknowledge them as much. There's kind of a, like, it's gonna be okay, or it's great. Whereas if you're developing something commercial, it's kind of very focused on like, what's wrong, how is this work process not running smoothly,
That's actually one of the things I think that's nice about open source is that a lot of the common manure is exposed, actually. I mean, our whole, the reason P5JS has a name at all today is just because we were in a rush for the conference, but it's very much a work in progress. There's no, set URL. We didn't give you, a package thing. It's a work in progress, but we're really transparent about it, and I love that about open source. I grew up, my motivation was, using Photoshop growing up, and then I had a switching point. Instead of using it, I was like, how does it work? I don't understand, why these 5 filters, right? No, I was 14. And so I love that, it's dirty, and it's difficult. We're going through a lot of issues. We haven't, sorted out everything P5 is going to do yet. And all that stuff's, on our GitHub repo, and people can see and probably, hopefully contribute, too. I mean, that's kind of part of it. Projects, like Artworks, they evolve with use over time, and that's what it's about. So open source can be more about inviting a conversation about the difficulties with software development, which usually happens behind closed doors. And it's nice when it doesn't.
Yesterday you told me at the dinner that you make your software in different languages. You make a programming language in different languages.
Oh, yeah.
Can you maybe say more about that?
But before working on P5 and being at RISD, I worked on a programming language called Scratch, which is a visual programming language for children that's free. And the source code is available. It wasn't open source development, but it is open sourced. One big project that I worked on with Scratch so it's a programming language, and it has syntax, and it has words. Although it's visual, you put everything together with building blocks, make it kind of easier. But we spent about a year, programming is usually done in English. There's no reason for that, really. At least we didn't think so. So we worked with volunteers who are using Scratch to teach in many other countries, and we worked to get it translated to about 60 languages so that people in France, students in France, could write their programs in French, upload them to our website, and then somebody in, say, China could download it and translate it to Chinese and still learn from their program.
So do you mean that the keywords of the language were translated as well, not just the variable?
Yeah, the whole language was actually Chinese. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, one thing that's really hard, I remember as a student, it's really hard when you see all these projects that exist to sort of imagine where the gaps are. You sort of see this landscape of tools and approaches and artists and so on. It's sort of hard to figure out what's missing. And I'm wondering what's missing? What do you think, what tools would you like to see, or what platforms or experiments would you like to see? What should we be building, or what should people in this audience be building?
Well, I think one thing I see a lot is that there's a tool, and it's really easy to get in and start making something and learn it. And then a lot of times I see students kind of stuck with that tool and not sure about how to use other ones or how it translates. So I would really like to see more things that kind of don't just give you an interface to start creating things, but also kind of get you deeper into some of the principles behind it that translate between these different platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Extendability or extensibility is huge, and I think that one of the reasons I have also embraced open source in terms of making tools and putting my art out there is because I don't like the idea of a black box that I can't look into to figure out how it works and to change it, because not every tool does what you want the way you might want to do it. Or you might find after using it for a long time that really you want to sort of tweak it and you can't. And I think that's huge, so I totally agree. More modular tools.
I think we have amazing tools out there. I mean, and they're more and more appearing all the time. It blows my mind, frankly. What I find though is what I'm frustrated by is sort of the lack of social support structure for open source. I think there's a sort of our culture at Wide still really doesn't get it, and I feel like that if the government or the schools really got behind it, then we could go a lot further. For example, we have millions of students doing homework and then basically throwing it away. Why aren't they contributing to open source projects and building a giant tower for all of us? Just one example. Why is all these? Why isn't we are getting there. I think isn't healthcare.gov on GitHub now? So, but you know why you know but it, you know, it needs, so we can all debug it, right? But
And if you want to find more cow manure, GitHub is a great place to look, because you can, well, and I mean that in the sense of you can see the process of building the software and seeing the mistakes, and you look in sort of the log, the history of the project as it's being developed, and you sort of see where people have gone wrong and have changed their minds, and that in and of itself can be really interesting. And there's some fun sort of things I've seen with searching for certain words on GitHub, where it's like, you know, someone's made a mistake, so you search the code comments and you go, I really screwed up here, or this is totally not the right way to do it, and you can find some really interesting gems just in there. So there's some manure.
So audience, please, if you want, come. There's microphones, and you know, come. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I had a question, which you sort of alluded to, about, you know, what are the skills other than coding that you need to support yourself through the open code, like partly the marketing, all that. So I think you touched on that, but the answer sort of then led me to another question, which is, you know, how do you decide what project is an open source project and what project you want to keep for yourself, for the market, for your, you know, what are the parameters, and how do you manage both, and what are the tools? I work for a company that is really often trying to help our artists sustain their practice over a long period of time. So what are the skills other than coding, and then how do you determine which project might be open source and which is not?
Well, I think a successful open source project that will get attention and gain traction has to sort of solve a problem. So rather than being able to just actually make it, it's also identifying sort of what it is that you want to build and that the community sort of needs. So there's that question of what are the unanswered problems that you can help leverage, or what can you do better, or provide an interesting take on something that might already be solvable, but do it in a novel and interesting enough way that it will gain traction on its own. I think that just being able to identify what to attack is really important.
yeah, I think Vade talked about a couple of his. He answered that question before, where he said, well, one way, for example, that Siphon project, that was something he open sourced. It's basically he scratched his own itch. He needed this thing, he did it, he put it out there, and it turns out we're all itchy. Another example is the to do something sort of infrastructural, and Linux works like that too. It's infrastructure for then other people to build their own websites, and so not every website is open source, but almost every website runs on open source infrastructure. And so again, I think that kind of project is much more likely to be successful as open source, and more likely to be adopted.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, I do think a lot more of the interesting tools get made for a personal necessity, for an artist especially. And actually, I think processing came out of something Casey and Ben wanted themselves. But then what might be challenging and useful for an artist to learn how to do is how to reflect on that need that they had in studio and the tool that they wrote, and then separate out the part that is personal from the part that could be abstracted and useful for everybody else. That might not always be a way that they're taught to work, and for good reason. But when then you are thinking about open sourcing, sharing, and something that's like a tool meant for other people, that ability to abstract away what works for everyone else could be useful.
So I have this kind of open-ended, provocative question, both to myself and to you guys. So remember McLuhan, who said medium is a message? I think we live today in a culture where the tool is a message. You go to GitHub, where there's over 1 million projects. Or you say, okay, I'm interested to some data visualization. There's like 40 different tools. There's maybe only 5 really great visualizations which have been created with them. So I'm getting the sense in the beginning of the 21st century that today the most talented, smartest people are not creating content, we're just writing tools and more tools. And I think that this ability to create new media constantly has replaced what we had before, where Whereas oil paints, when people do oil painting for 200 years, right? So I myself have been writing open source tools for the last 6 years. It's great. But I kind of wonder what happened in our media culture where it's almost our creative energy has focused more on making more tools as opposed to creating just great content with Photoshop, So if you share some of this, back in your mind kind of dark thoughts, please tell me.
I mean, from
Any
personal
dark holes about tools?
Well, from personal experience, my creative output dropped dramatically when I started building tools because I had to build the tool. There's a limited number of hours in the day, and it's really tiring, and there's a million creative decisions that go into figuring all sorts of problems open up that you would never anticipated when you're designing stuff like that from scratch. So, it's without a doubt a creative process, but it's in a way also a trap. And I totally agree that it can be, a trap in the sense of you go down this path, you're going to go down this path, and you're going to build stuff, and it's so easy to get caught up in just building tools and not actually using the tools and mastering the tools that you've built. Because maybe it would be easier if I just built a better tool. I wouldn't have to master it, right? And then you just keep going and going and going. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a sort of a cultural competitiveness where people try to be more abstract and more meta. And it used to be that people would, like you said, paint or sculpture, but then as contemporary art developed, it's like every artist needed to develop their own style. And then now every artist needs to develop their own medium, and every artist needs to create their own tool. And so it's just like this spiral up into this Tower of Babel. And so it's, I don't know, it's where we are.
I think it's also the consequence of art history, because now when participatory art became so big, where actually everything was dissolving into building social ties, it just makes sense that the artists are creating tools and then just see how people use them and create their own practices with them.
So many of you, not only tool makers, but you're artists using your tools. One thing that's always, so there are people who just say, well, I'll just use a guitar that's made. There's other people who say, I'm writing a new musical instrument, and that's when I'm going to play. One of the issues with that as an author of tools is, are you writing it for you in your first song, or are you actually thinking about what other songs other people other than you will play? And I'm just curious how you deal, since so many of you personally use your tools. When are you doing it for you? How do you manage doing it for you and what you know you want to see, and saying at times harder to write, doing things that are a little broader because you're thinking of a bigger system picture of how someone's going to use this musical instrument that you're making? Thanks.
Well, I guess I can say that I think that my relationship to the tool that I'm building is a little bit different. I feel like I had a lot of experiences as a student where a teacher would open something up for me. They would take the time to share what they knew or show me how to do something, and really made me feel like whatever I wanted to try and do was possible. And that was, that's why I got anywhere, or I'm doing anything I'm doing, is because someone else taught me how to believe. And so when I'm making this tool, it's really it feels for me going back to those roots and feeling like I have no choice but to try to do the same thing, to make something that might help other people learn or get excited or inspired. And so it's kind of like a separate stream from some of the artwork that I showed earlier, but it's a lot about, I guess, thinking about people and how technology can be an interface.
Yeah, personally, I try to leave some of the stuff undone. So, and those are the hooks for other people to start to be engaged in with the code. So I try not to think about what other people are going to do with it and sort of do those things for them. But I want to sort of leave some bait.
Hello, thanks for coming. I wanted to ask about Creative Commons and if the relationship between open source and Creative Commons, if you think it's codependent or if they're completely independent of each other.
I actually have some software that's where the source code is licensed under Creative Commons, which is not, normally Creative Commons is for
Content.
media or finished works. So like the Siphon project, we had to make it as open as it could be. So we used the BSD license, which if you're familiar is just pretty much you can do whatever you want. And that was just out of necessity of having to have it be adopted by commercial entities who wouldn't be afraid of any other license. And I actually went out of my way to email people and be like, what license would you guys like? Because I just want this to be successful. But in terms of some of the more creative, aesthetic tools, fringe tools, I released some Creative Commons, and I don't really remember my thought process at the time, but essentially they're made request that they're non-commercial, used in a non-commercial necessity. And on the website, we sort of explain what we mean by that, which is just don't put it in a software package you're going to sell, but you can play with it. But I think that there's a dependency there. Many of the software licenses, like the GNU license, is viral, and a lot of the meaning that if you do something with this, you have to release it under the same license. And Creative Commons is essentially the same thing, but for finished works. So there's a totally direct parallel there, I think. Sorry, I rambled.
Yeah.
And I think that parallel could use some literacy. I mean, I feel like there could be some more education around those things in art schools and also engineering schools, actually. Thanks. I think just to echo what you said, like, I think the tools tend to be under the open source licenses, and then the content that's created with them under Creative Commons, but they do have a lot of the same underpinning kind of motivations. But I don't know if there's enough literacy out there about these things. I don't know enough for sure. I know that there was hesitance, like when I was in RISD and I was making some artworks with friends, and then for me the instinct is to share it, and it wasn't the instinct for some other people. And we couldn't really have a conversation about it either, actually, and I thought we should. I mean, if we had been more educated about it, then we could have.
So we're going to wrap it up, but what I want to do is invite all of the members of this panel to endorse one thing. So think about a book, a talk, a project, a person, something that people in this audience should go hear or read or see or think or feel.
I can start. I wanted to mention Yoko Ono's Grapefruit book. I kind of consider it a form of open source or Creative Commons, where she had some ideas of the kinds of things people should be doing and that she should be doing, and she wrote instructions and she made a book out of it. So I really love that book, Grapefruit.
Can I endorse two things?
Sure.
Okay.
Quickly.
Okay, two things really quickly. One is a talk by Kyle McDonald, who has worked on open frameworks for probably the past 5 years, I think. It's called How to Give Anything Away, or something like that, from I/O 2012. And I saw that talk, and it was a really big inspiration for me. And the other is Jay Silver, and I think you can probably find a talk of his too, but he's the creator of Makey Makey, among other things. And I think the two of them are like the energy and the optimism and the excitement that you see when they speak. It says a lot about kind of what open source can mean.
I'm going to endorse JavaScript. Because, it sounds easy, but it's hard for me to say that because I have a background in programming languages and started out very interested in compilers. I worked on compilers, and when JavaScript first came out, it was considered as sort of a disaster of language design, and we all of us academics sneered at it. Its performance was terrible and its design was terrible. But it turned out that as time goes by, they fixed it in so many ways. Now its performance is great, and you can do so much in the web browser now. It's not just manipulating documents or HTML. There's massive media libraries available, and so it's the easiest way to sort of sit down in front of a computer and code and share it. So it's the closest connection to sort of the social coding. So if any of you are thinking about getting into programming, open your web browser, start with JavaScript, and you won't go wrong.
Yeah.
So I'll endorse, even though I'm not getting paid for it, two things. Shader Toy, an online graphics programming environment, and there's amazing examples. And if you like to do, or if you're interested in learning how to program graphics, this is a phenomenal environment to experiment with, and I've learned a lot. And there's, on the Shader Toy website, there's some game programmers that are doing absolutely mind-bogglingly amazing stuff it's like wizardry. So if that's something that floats your boat, definitely check that out. It's really cool.
I want to endorse Eclectic Tech Carnival, which is a group of female informatic enthusiasts who started in the 90s to do festivals once a year for women who wanted to learn how to program, and they really got me very, very excited about open source. And it was the first time I heard about open source, and since then I'm addicted. So Eclectic Tech Carnival is something to check out. And also I want to endorse Red Burns, because she really, really encouraged me a lot. So, yeah.
So, well, I'm super excited about this panel. I love being on a panel which would endorse Yoko Ono and JavaScript and this amazing carnival and Red Burns, who we're all going to remember tomorrow. And so thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.